He laughed in my face, said my online degree was as worthless as a napkin at Denny's. That day, in front of the whole boardroom, I smiled through the humiliation, but I wasn't going to let it slide. So I did what no one expected. I bought the entire diploma mill he secretly ran and turned it into a joke with his name on every fake degree. Pause, now. Guess who's the worthless one? Blake. My name is Rachel Myers. And the day Blake Whitmore laughed at me in front of 12 board members was the day I buried the old version of myself. I still remember how cold that room felt. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of the way Blake's eyes scanned my resume like it was a used napkin at a truck stop. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossed his arms, and smirked. An MBA. Online, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. What's next? A law degree from a cereal box. Laughter. From all directions, not the friendly kind. The kind that bites into your spine and lingers. I could feel my face heat up, my jaw clenched, but my lips curled into a smile, a quiet one, a dangerous one. I didn't say a word back, just tucked the shame into my pocket like a receipt, one I would cash in later. I'd worked nights for 2 years while holding down a full-time job just to earn that degree. Sure, it wasn't from Yale or Stanford, but it was real, honest, mine. And Blake, Mr. Wall Street wannabe, thought it was beneath him. That's fine, because if there's one thing I learned from years of being underestimated, it's this. People like Blake never look down until they trip. I walked out of that boardroom that day without looking back. No, I didn't get the job. But I walked away with something more valuable motive. You ever have a moment in your life where everything becomes still, like the world just freezes, and there's a voice in your head whispering, "This is the moment, the one you'll remember forever." That was it for me. I drove back to my one-bedroom apartment in Boulder, Colorado, took off my heels, opened my laptop, and started researching Blake Whitmore. I wasn't looking for revenge, not yet. I was looking for understanding. Why did a man like that have so much power? Why did people respect him when all he offered was ego and empty laughter? 2 hours into my digging, I hit gold. It started with a LinkedIn profile too polished, too perfect, then a Reddit thread, then an archived site on the Wayback Machine. Turns out Blake wasn't just a smug CEO. He was the secret owner of a for-profit education network, the kind that sold fake diplomas to desperate people for thousands of dollars. He ran it under a different name, Northridge Global Education, based out of Tampa, Florida, a diploma mill, hidden behind a curtain of fake testimonials and shiny websites. The deeper I looked, the darker it got. Shell companies, bank transfers overseas. Everything about it screamed fraud, but legally gray enough to avoid jail. Smart, sleazy, typical Blake. And that's when the idea began to form. Not revenge, not yet, but a reckoning. I printed everything. Bank screenshots, domain registrations, legal loopholes, spent weeks cross-referencing names, emails, signatures. People say you shouldn't hold grudges. I say hold them tight, sharpen them, turn them into tools. The old Rachel would have cried. The new Rachel, she was just getting started. And somewhere in a boardroom in downtown Denver, Blake was probably still laughing. Good. Let him laugh. Because soon, I'd own the punchline. People think revenge is a moment, a single act, a scene with dramatic music and a final mic drop. They're wrong. Revenge is a build-up, a blueprint, a long, slow breath held underwater until it turns into a storm. After uncovering Blake's dirty secret, his diploma mill in Tampa, I didn't react. I studied. I watched. I found out everything I could about Northridge Global Education. The shell companies it passed through, the parent LLCs that led to P.O. boxes in Delaware, the fake accreditation badges plastered across its site like gold stars on a toddler's homework. Each page I clicked felt like peeling back another layer of Blake's hypocrisy. The man who laughed at my real degree had built a fortune selling fake ones. Oh, the irony. I created a new identity. Not fake, just curated. A woman named Vanessa Hartwell. Investor. Graduate of private business schools in Europe. A background so elite, no one dared question it. I hired a voice coach to perfect an accent. Bought business cards with foil print. Had a website built with stock photos of team members who didn't exist. I became the kind of woman Blake would beg to do business with. And I waited. It didn't take long. Greed is a scent, and Blake could smell it from miles away. Through an anonymous inquiry sent from a virtual office in Manhattan, I expressed interest in buying educational platforms to expand in the U.S. market. Within 48 hours, I got a reply. Not from Blake directly, of course, but from a man named Carson Hill, his chief operations officer. Funny thing, Carson didn't exist on LinkedIn or anywhere else. Another mask, another lie. Perfect. We scheduled a Zoom meeting. I darkened my camera, citing poor connection from Monaco. Carson, whose voice trembled just enough to confirm he was out of his depth, gave me the full pitch. Northridge wasn't just a website. It was a system. Hundreds of templates. A customer support chatbot trained to deflect legal inquiries. Delivery in 72 hours. Fully accredited. All they needed, Carson said, was fresh capital to scale. I played coy, asked probing questions, took notes, recorded everything. I needed leverage, something undeniable. Something I could use to not only acquire the empire, but to ruin Blake with his own blueprints. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling, thinking about my parents, how they'd saved every cent to help me afford night classes, how they believed in integrity, real education. They didn't know I was plotting to buy a lie, but I wasn't doing it to profit. I was doing it to expose a fraud, and to make sure no one else ever got laughed out of a room for trying to build something honest. Over the next 2 weeks, I created a fake shell corp, Hartwell Ventures, registered in Nevada, fully funded by me thanks to years of saved consulting fees and a small inheritance I'd never touched. We moved into the due diligence phase. Blake still didn't know it was me. He thought he was the shark, but I was the one swimming just beneath the surface. When I finally met him again, face to face, it was at a private club in Palm Beach, the kind with $80 cocktails and gold-plated menus. He didn't recognize me. My hair was shorter, my posture sharper, my smile deadlier. He shook my hand and said, "Vanessa, pleasure to meet you in person." I looked into his eyes and replied, "Likewise, Mr. Whitmore, I've heard fascinating things." We discussed terms. He bragged a lot, called it a high-margin miracle. I nodded politely while imagining flipping his entire castle upside down. He never once suspected. That's the thing about narcissists. They never see you coming. They think once they crush you, you stay crushed. But I had remade myself in fire. By the end of the meeting, we had a deal. I would buy Northridge and all associated assets under Hartwell Ventures for a sum that made Blake's eyes gleam. He smiled like a man who thought he'd won. I signed like a woman who was just beginning. 3 weeks later, all legal transfers were finalized. I had full control, admin access, all domain keys, hosting rights, archived chats, customer lists, payment processors, everything. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the Colorado night air drifting in through a cracked window. I opened the admin panel and changed everything. New name, new logo, new tagline. Welcome to Blake University because anyone can be a legend in their own head. I laughed, a real laugh this time. Then I clicked publish, and the countdown began. But before the world could laugh with me, I needed to build the stage. I hired a freelance developer to rewrite the entire back end of the site. No more auto-generation of fake diplomas. Now. When people clicked Order Now, they got redirected to a landing page titled You Deserve Better. The page explained how diploma mills preyed on hope and desperation. I included testimonials from real people I contacted: nurses who lost licenses, immigrants who got deported, single moms who spent their savings on dreams built on lies. Their words were raw, real, unfiltered. And each one made Blake's empire crumble a little more. But I wasn't done. I sent press kits to journalists, education watchdogs, nonprofits, attached documentation, timelines, audio clips from Carson's pitch. Then I launched a campaign, Expose the Degree King. It spread like wildfire. Reddit, TikTok, Twitter. Suddenly, Blake's name was trending, but not for the reasons he wanted. I watched an influencer read his email rejection letter from Northridge aloud, followed by my new site's message. She cried, then she smiled. The comments exploded. Blake tried to respond, hired PR, filed cease and desists, claimed he was a victim of identity theft, but he had signed everything, left fingerprints on every transaction. And the deeper people dug, the worse it got. Offshore accounts, fake accreditations, stock photos of fake professors. It was a house of cards in a wind tunnel. I got a call from a lawyer representing a class action group. They asked if I'd testify. I agreed on one condition, that I deliver my statement on record, with my full name and credentials. Rachel Myers, MBA, the same woman Blake had once laughed out of a room. I took the stand in Denver wearing a gray blazer and a calm smile. My voice didn't shake once. I told the story from the beginning, how a man with a golden tie mocked my degree, not knowing he'd handed me a match. And I lit it. When I walked out of the courthouse, there were cameras, reporters, strangers thanking me, but the only thing I heard was Blake's laughter from that day in the boardroom. Only now it echoed differently. Now it sounded like fear. I didn't seek fame. I didn't cash in on the scandal. I donated the remaining server space and funds from Hartwell Ventures to a real online education nonprofit. Because people deserve second chances, but Blake didn't deserve to sell them. The final nail came when his investors sued him for fraud. He lost his company, his license, and eventually, his voice. He disappeared from the business world completely. Some say he moved to Costa Rica. Others say he changed his name. I don't care. I didn't do this to ruin a man. I did it to remind the world that integrity still matters. And sometimes, the best way to rise is to rise silently until your silence becomes thunder. Power doesn't disappear overnight. It resists. It claws. It pretends it's still in control long after it's been stripped bare. And Blake Whitmore, he didn't go down quietly. After my expose of Northridge Global Education went public, I expected a backlash. I anticipated his lawyers, his press releases, his pathetic claims of being hacked or targeted by corporate espionage. But what I didn't expect was the silence. Blake vanished. No response, no interviews, not even a tweet. At first, it felt anticlimactic. I wanted him to rage, to panic, to face me, but he didn't. He slipped into the shadows like a coward. And somehow, that made me even more determined to finish what I started. Because exposing his diploma mill wasn't the end. It was only the first domino. I started getting messages. Hundreds. From students who had been scammed. From former employees who were afraid to speak out. From whistleblowers who were tired of staying silent. I built a timeline, a dossier. Each piece of evidence added fuel to the fire. Turns out, Northridge wasn't the only scheme Blake ran. He had other ventures, recruitment services that placed fake graduates into real jobs, partnerships with sketchy training centers overseas. It was a web tangled, dirty, and perfectly orchestrated, and now it was unraveling. I partnered with a journalist from The Atlantic, someone who had been chasing diploma mills for years, but never had a smoking gun. I gave her everything: screenshots, recordings, financial records, and the full story of how I had bought and flipped Northridge. We worked in secret, double-checked every source, every quote, every dollar traced. When the article dropped, it wasn't just a story. It was a tidal wave. The Degree King: How One CEO Scammed America's Education System, until a woman with an online MBA brought him down. I stared at the headline for a long time. Then I closed my laptop, poured a glass of wine, and stood by my window as the Denver skyline lit up like embers. By the end of that week, Blake's name was blacklisted from every major conference, board, and investor circle. Old allies ghosted him. Some even publicly condemned him to save face. But Blake wasn't done yet. Like a rat in a burning building, he tried to find an exit. He staged a comeback, quietly, under a new alias. A new startup, Ascend Learning Solutions, showed up online. Different branding, same con. This time, he was offering AI-generated credentials. Faster, cheaper, untraceable. But he made one mistake. He used the same offshore payment processor, and I was watching. I traced the domain back, used a tech contact I had met during my Northridge investigation. We uncovered the connection in less than 72 hours. I confronted him, so not online, not through lawyers. In person, I waited outside his condo in Miami. Not the flashy penthouse he once boasted about, This one was smaller, humble, the kind of place someone hides in. When he saw me, he froze. He didn't even pretend to smile. "Rachel," he muttered, "what do you want?" "Closure," I said, "and a warning." He tried to act unbothered, claimed everything was legal, that he was pivoting to innovation. I handed him a folder, inside a letter from the Department of Education, a list of former clients demanding refunds, and a court summons tied to a pending fraud case. His face went pale. "You think this scares me?" he spat. I leaned in. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You're not scary anymore, Blake. You're just noise." And I silenced noise. I walked away, didn't look back. That was the last time I saw him. But his downfall wasn't cinematic. No fireworks, no handcuffs, just a slow, humiliating erosion. He lost his investors, his second company dissolved, his assets were frozen, and those he once mocked, they rose. The woman from Nebraska who used a Northridge diploma to try and become a nurse, she's now enrolled in a real program with full scholarship support. The single dad from Arizona who spent $3,000 on a fake MBA, he now works in an apprenticeship program sponsored by the very nonprofit I helped build. The scam hurt people, but the truth helped more. And me, I didn't return to the boardrooms. I didn't chase titles. I found purpose in fixing the cracks Blake exploited. Every scammer thinks they're the exception, that their empire is untouchable, but the higher they build it, the louder it collapses. I don't think about Blake much anymore, but sometimes, when I'm walking through downtown Boulder, past the co-working spaces and coffee shops where I once cried over rejection letters, I think about that laugh, the one he gave me when he thought he'd won. It doesn't haunt me now. It fuels me. Because every time someone underestimates a woman with an online degree, they forget she might be the one writing their ending. The irony is, in some twisted way, Blake taught me more than any professor ever did. Not about business, not about marketing, but about masks, the ones people wear, and the ones they try to make you wear. He reminded me that people who laugh at your credentials are usually terrified of your courage. And people like me, we don't need their validation. We build our own tables. A few months after his disappearance, I was invited to speak at a tech summit in Austin. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't a startup unicorn. I was just me. But when I walked onto that stage and saw hundreds of young faces, immigrants, first-gen grads, online learners, I knew why I had to be there. I told them the story, all of it, not as a victory speech, but as a blueprint. A path to follow, a warning, and a promise that your worth isn't printed on paper, it's built in the fire you survive. The applause was long, honest, like thunder rolling over a mountain. I didn't cry, but I smiled so hard it hurt. Since then, I've helped pass legislation in Colorado to tighten regulation on diploma mills. I've spoken with lawmakers, educators, even federal task forces. The same girl they laughed at, now helping write the rules. That's not revenge, that's justice. And if Blake ever hears my name again, maybe in some dark room, watching a screen he no longer controls, I hope he realizes one thing. You can build your empire on lies. But truth always collects its debt. People think the climax of a revenge story is the downfall. The moment the villain falls to their knees, begging, broken. But that's a fantasy. The real climax, it's quieter, colder. It's the moment you realize you no longer need to hate them, because they already lost. After the exposé, after the lawsuits, after the last of Blake's ghost companies had collapsed like dominoes under a magnifying glass, I felt something strange in my chest. Not victory, not relief, but stillness. Like my soul had unclenched after holding its breath for years. I took time away from the noise, rented a cabin in the Rockies, no cell signal, just snow, silence, and a wood-burning stove. For days, I did nothing. I sat with myself. No revenge to plot, no headline to chase. Just me, the woman with the online degree, the former punching bag, the survivor. And that's when I realized revenge is never about the other person. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to erase. When Blake laughed at me in that boardroom, he didn't just mock my degree. He tried to rewrite my value. And I let him for a moment, but not anymore. One morning, I woke to find a letter had been slipped under my door. No return address, no sender, just a thin envelope, trembling slightly in the wind. Inside was a printout of an article, a local paper from Tampa. The headline read, "Former CEO indicted in multi-state education fraud scandal." Blake's face was blurry in the low-res photo, his eyes dull, like a ghost of the man who once sat above everyone, laughing. I don't know who sent it, but I smiled. He was facing criminal charges now, not just civil suits, real time, real accountability, and all I felt was peace. I left the cabin the next day, drove back to Boulder, reconnected with old friends, started mentoring students, told them my story not for sympathy, but for fire. I met a girl named Tasha, first-gen college student. Wanted to study law, but was terrified her community college degree wouldn't be enough. I looked her in the eyes and said, "What matters isn't the name on the building, it's the name you make for yourself." She cried, and then she got to work. Meanwhile, I kept getting invitations, conferences, panels, even universities that had once rejected me now asked me to speak. I declined most of them, not out of pride, but because I didn't want to become another person chasing validation. I had found something better, integrity. Then one day I received an email, the sender anonymous, the content a single line. "He's speaking at a private event in New York. Thought you'd like to know." Attached was a flyer, a closed-door seminar at a luxury hotel in Manhattan. The guest speaker, an alias. But the face, definitely Blake. He wasn't done, not yet. He was trying to rebrand, again. This time, as a consultant for alternative credentialing. I didn't hesitate. I booked a flight, put on a black blazer, walked into that seminar like I belonged. He was mid-speech when I entered, talking about democratizing access and rethinking traditional education. I sat in the front row. He saw me, paused, swallowed, then kept going, pretending I wasn't there. But his words wobbled, his pitch cracked. After it ended, I approached him as others left, slowly, calmly. He didn't run. He knew it was pointless. "You don't stop, do you?" I said. He looked at me, weary. "What do you want, Rachel?" I paused, then leaned in. "Nothing. Just wanted to remind you that I'm still watching." He didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because that moment, that flicker of fear in his eyes was the last ember I needed to see. I turned and walked away. This time for good. Because the truth is, revenge has an expiration date. After a while, it curdles and becomes bitterness. Unless you let it go. I don't carry Blake's ghost anymore. I carry mine, and I walk with her. Strong, free, unbothered. Not because I burned him down, but because I rebuilt myself from the ashes. The next morning, I sat at a small cafe on the Upper West Side. The sky was gray, heavy with the kind of spring rain that cleans more than it ruins. I opened my journal, something I hadn't touched since the war began, and I wrote a single line. "Victory isn't loud. It's quiet enough to hear your own breath again." That day, I walked through Central Park without a destination, just letting the air carry me. I thought about all the people still trapped in cycles like mine, still believing they weren't enough because someone in a suit told them so. I thought of my father, a welder who never finished high school but had the wisdom of 10 professors, and my mother who read me books late at night, telling me my mind was the most beautiful thing I owned. They never asked what school I got into. They only asked what I was learning. And somewhere between the lilac trees and the joggers and neon headbands, I realized maybe that's what I'm meant to do now. Not just fight the Blakes of the world, but help the Rachels before they become soldiers. I flew home the next day and I got to work. I launched a project called Degree of Truth, a nonprofit that helps vet online education programs, supports first-gen students, and offers legal resources for scam victims. We built an app that scans diploma sites for red flags. I partnered with engineers, educators, and survivors. We hosted workshops. We told stories. We turned pain into policy. And through it all, I kept one photo in my office, that same grainy headline of Blake's indictment. Not out of pride, but as a reminder. A reminder that no lie lasts forever. 6 months later, I received a letter, no name, no return address. Inside was a check for $10,000, made out to Degree of Truth. On the memo line, just 4 words. For what she did? I never learned who sent it. But in that moment, I understood something profound. Revenge is personal, but redemption is communal. It echoes through others, it ripples, and long after Blake is forgotten, those ripples will remain. A girl in a small town will think twice before trusting a flashy website. A boy with a GED will find a mentor instead of a scam. And somewhere, someone will remember my story and choose a different path. Not because I was a hero, but because I refused to stay silent. And in this noisy, brutal world that might be the most powerful thing any of us can do. Some stories end with applause, others with justice. Mine, it ends with a mirror. Because once the fire settles, once the villains are gone and the smoke clears, you're left with yourself. And the question becomes, who are you now? After Blake's collapse, after the media storm, after the policies passed and the nonprofit found its footing, I found myself alone in my apartment, surrounded by quiet. Not the hollow kind, the kind that feels earned. For the first time in years, there were no emails to chase, no crisis to extinguish, no ghosts to confront, just morning light pouring across the floor, and peace. But peace doesn't mean stillness, it means clarity. And I saw clearly that my story wasn't just about dismantling Blake's empire. It was about building something better in its place. So I kept going. We expanded Degree of Truth into 4 states, launched a fellowship for students with non-traditional degrees, created a watchdog database for diploma scams publicly searchable, always free. I testified before Congress. Let that sink in. The same woman mocked for her online MBA, now standing in front of lawmakers, defending the rights of those just like her. It wasn't lost on me, the symmetry, the poetry. One senator pulled me aside after my testimony and said, "You're the reason we're rewriting this bill." And all I could think was good. Rewrite it. Because the old system was built for men like Blake. Men who laugh at the hardworking, who profit off desperation, who turn paper into poison. They underestimated us, but we've stopped playing defense. We're writing our own rules now. Still, not everything is triumph. I've lost things along the way. Time. Sleep. A few relationships that couldn't weather the weight of the war I was fighting. There were nights I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I was becoming the thing I swore to destroy, obsessed, sharp-edged, incapable of rest. But every time I saw an email from a student saying, "You saved me from a scam," or a parent thanking me for giving their kid a second chance, I knew. This wasn't bitterness. This was purpose. One day, at a university I'd once dreamed of attending, but couldn't afford, they unveiled a new scholarship fund, fully endowed, named after me. I stood at the podium in front of a crowd that would have once dismissed me, and I said, "This isn't about me. This is for every person who's ever been told they're not enough. Every student who took night classes after working 2 shifts, every immigrant who studied by candlelight, every parent who sacrificed their dreams so their child could have one. You are enough. Your journey is valid, and no one can take that from you." They stood, applauded, some cried, but I wasn't looking for applause. I was looking for the next door to open. The final time I ever heard Blake's name was during a podcast interview. The host asked, "Do you ever think about what happened to him?" I paused, then said, "No, because he's not the point. The point is what came after, what we chose to do with the ashes. And that's the truth. Revenge may start the story, but redemption finishes it. And legacy, real legacy, is what you build after the fire. I've spent years now helping others rise, not from shame, but from silence. And if you're listening to this, wondering if your story matters, if your struggle is valid, if your online degree is real enough for the world, hear me now. It is. You are. Because no piece of paper defines you. Character does, and courage, and the quiet decision to stand back up, even when the world laughs. I was once the girl in the back of the room, told I wasn't good enough. Now I help shape the rooms. And I leave the door wide open. For you, for all of us. The work didn't stop after the applause faded. If anything, that's when it truly began. Because institutions are slow to change. Systems resist. People in power don't yield ground without a fight. But I'd already learned how to fight. So I showed up to city council meetings, talked to school boards, built coalitions with other activists and educators who were tired of the lies. We pushed for curriculum reform, digital literacy, financial education, awareness about predatory programs. We visited high schools, community colleges, youth centers. And every time I stood in front of a crowd, I remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be the joke, and I made damn sure no one in those rooms ever felt that way again. I remember one young woman, Maria, 19 years old, working 2 jobs, attending a for-profit school that turned out to be fake. She was ready to quit everything. But after hearing my story, she applied for a scholarship we funded. Today, she's a nurse in Chicago. She sends me a card every year. Her handwriting's still shaky, but her words are strong. "You saved my future," she wrote once, "so I can save lives." That's how cycles break. Not with grand gestures, but with people choosing truth over convenience, choosing growth over shame. Years have passed now. Blake's story has been buried by newer scandals, fresher headlines, but the lesson remains. We live in a world obsessed with shortcuts. Fast success, easy fame, manufactured prestige, but nothing real comes easy. The people who make it, who truly make it, they do so not in spite of their scars, but because of them. My scars remind me I survived. And more than that, they remind me I mattered. You may not get invited to the fancy rooms. You may not have ivy-covered walls or gold seals on your diploma. But you have voice, you have story, you have grit. And those things, they're the new currency. If I could speak to my younger self, now that exhausted woman clutching her online MBA and praying someone would take her seriously, I'd say, they won't see you. Not at first. But don't dim yourself to fit their gaze. Shine anyway, loudly, unapologetically, because the world needs your light. And when they finally turn around to look, make sure they see fire.